Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, where leadership meets entertainment. I'm Kristin, and as always, I am joined by my buff co-host, Ron. Now, all jokes aside, Ron put that in there. He likes to put in different things that I read at random. But you have been working out. I can tell your arms look larger in your Instagram reels that you've been doing.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Unless you're just wearing tighter t-shirts.
It's a filter. It's a filter. But thank you.
A bicep filter.
It's a bicep filter.
I bet they're out there. So this podcast gets its name from Ron's best-selling book, The Dirty Side of Leadership. And this is a funny story. So you can get a copy on Amazon, folks, just so you know. And if you'd like to listen, you can also get it on Audible. So I wanted to talk about this because I think it's really funny. The reason we're even going over that right now, one of our listeners, someone who listens regularly, was telling Ron, you should write a book, and suggesting titles. And Ron's like, you do realize, after going back and forth, turns out they didn't realize Ron had already written a book, and that's the namesake for this podcast. So I thought that was funny enough where I needed to mention it, Ron.
Yeah, we won't mention the name, but he's been a guest on our podcast before. And anyway, it starts with M and rhymes with Hardy. So
busted.
But it did remind us that I guess we should mention that occasionally. I mean,
yes,
I need to sell about 1 million more books, so maybe this will do it.
Yeah, there you go. And much like Ron's book, we pride ourselves on tackling what are sometimes uncomfortable truths, as we just did right there, in work and in life. So Ron, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. Kristin and I always have some drama before we record, and this is no exception. We just took care of some issues. I'm really excited. Kristin knows, and she gets the credit for developing this episode, but as soon as she sent me the text, I knew I was going to love it because it deals with psychology, and you're going to understand that when we get into it. But this is basically not just an episode on leadership, but it's like a leadership intervention. And it's just a topic that I absolutely adore. But we've talked about my book. Kristin, you hosted or emceed a big event last Thursday. How did that go?
It went really well. It's funny. I look back, I'm always like, okay, it was really smooth. There were a few things that I look back and I was like, oh, okay. It could have been to make it a perfect 100% perfection, right? Like I could have done this and that, but all in all, I had so many people coming up to me and like, you did a great job moderating. They were gathering my info, my contact, my handles, right? So it went very, very well. But as good leaders do, you have to reflect and say, man, if it was a 9.6, how could I have gotten that to a 10? And that's what I did. So I absolutely love the opportunity to moderate, especially when it's for such a great cause. And it was for 360 Options 360, and it's a pro-life clinic. And they do some great stuff for women in Clark County and the Portland area.
Oh, that's great. Wonderful.
Yes.
Take us into this.
All right. So we are tackling a truth that hits hard. So I found a quote on Instagram, and it is, nothing will kill a great employee faster than watching you tolerate a bad one. That resonated with me, Ron.
Bam. Chris and I do the Ron's Rants, and this is borderline one of the number one complaints that we get is about, other employees who are just running amok and no one does anything about it. So it seems like people can't find a balance. They either micromanage or they're rough and gruff, or they just let things go like a circus, and they don't deal with those problem employees. So I think this is going to be very important for us to delve into. So as we go, Kristin, we have both been in management. If this is the first time you're tuning in, I was in government, and Kristin was in banking. So we kind of represent two different sectors. So we're going to implement, as we always do, some stories and experiences as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're going to dig into two key psychological dynamics. Now, first one being why leaders tolerate bad employees in the first place. And second, what happens to the great ones, your great employees, when they witness you doing that?
Yeah, let's re-emphasize the question. So, why do good leaders who otherwise seem competent tolerate underperformers or toxic employees? Let's visit that.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right?
It is.
So I honestly, with my research, I feel like it's fear. It's fear of conflict, fear of being the bad guy, fear of creating waves in the short term. And, you do scenario based training, Ron, and a lot of it's on fear minimization strategies. Brief us on that.
Yeah, we do. And we have actual scenarios that two people sit down, one's the manager, one's the employee, and they go through these different scenarios. But what I have them do before is you visualize a positive outcome. Your brain is always telling you stories, and you have to flip the script. So you have to visualize, I'm going to do well. I'm going to help this employee. I'm going to take care of this issue. So I have them making those kind of positive affirmations. Then we do grounded breaths. A deep breath. And I teach them to do that like when you're shaking someone's hand, you're about to do a difficult phone call, you just take a
Right.
grounded breath. And then if we practice in a dynamic environment, which means, it's called stress inoculation. You put people in stressful situations like we used to do in the Federal Law Enforcement Academy. And when they operate through stress, then they start to get accustomed to it and they're more effective. So that's what it's designed to do, these scenarios. And of course, I teach two magic words. That's an easy way to land into this, to say, let's say, Kristin, you were coming in late. I would say, Kristin, I noticed you were late twice last week, and I was wondering, what can we do to make sure that doesn't happen again? It's a great segue into dealing with conflict or
Right.
providing corrective feedback. Then, of course, we practice on our listening skills. And I have a secret strategy that I teach people. So, Kristin, if you were meeting with someone and it is your first time, you're a new manager, and you're so nervous that you're having trouble getting together, then you could just say, I brought you in to discuss, this report. There were a lot of corrections. How did you feel about it? And while they're talking, you can do a couple little secret grounded breaths. And I've had so much response from people tell me that helped them immensely.
Yeah.
So you don't have to just delve right in. Now, you don't want to do false, like, hey, Kristin, how's your kids? You don't do the false pleasantries.
Right.
But I can have you talk. And it also gives me your perspective, because a lot of times people will say, yeah, I kind of skimmed over that one. Sometimes they will coach
Right.
themselves.
Yeah,
So,
they will.
yeah, we've gotten great response. And by the way, I'm doing that training in Texas here this week. So
Yeah, that's
it'll
going to
be
be
interesting to see how
incredible.
it goes.
I can't wait to hear how that goes because, that's something that was always big for me. If you had an employee that was self-aware, it made life so much
It's so
easier.
much better.
So when you ask, how do you think it went? And they're like, awesome. And you were like, wow, that's like, they're not self-aware because, there were a lot of issues within. So then, you're dealing with a different animal.
Yeah,
And
you're right.
I think we both probably been there.
Yeah. And after fear, there's a trap it's a psychological trap called loss aversion. And people's often, they're just afraid of loss.
Yeah.
And maybe it's something from their childhood, who knows? But they think to themselves, if I fire this person, we're going to be short staffed. It's going to take a long time to gain someone. And instead of dealing with it, as Barney Fife, now that's outdated, used to say, nip it in the bud, they just keep asking questions, instead of asking the real question is, how's morale? How's this affecting?
Yeah.
So it's that loss aversion.
And that's a real thing because I know I've experienced where I did let somebody go and then they didn't let me fill that position.
Yeah.
They just cut it. Yeah. So that sticks with you. And man, was I ticked, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then that is an element there. It's like, okay. And I've heard stories where it's like, oh, my boss, we have this troublemaker on our team, but if they cut him, then we're going to lose out on this. The boss is going to have to step up and do this and this, right? It's bad, but really it's, you have to understand what it's doing. And I'm glad we're doing this episode because I think the worst thing is turning off the good employee, and then you're going to have more attrition. So many leaders, they confuse kindness with weakness. And they're thinking that being nice means giving unlimited chances. But real leadership, it means protecting your culture, even if it makes someone uncomfortable.
That's exactly right. And there's also ego. If you terminate someone, especially if you're the one that hired them, it's tough on the ego.
Yeah.
It looks like you had a weak link in the team, or you made a mistake when you hired that person. So, I think that's a real thing that people deal with instead of taking it on the chin, as we say many times, take the blame, share the credit.
Yes.
They don't want to take the blame, but you're much better off to deal with it and move on.
Absolutely. I mean, even worse, some leaders, they like the control. A bad employee is easy to manage. I've heard of this dynamic before. So it's like the manager wants that ability to micromanage. So they feed off of it. They feel like it gives them this power, this control, and they keep the leader feeling needed. Have you ever witnessed that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because sometimes, and I'm not talking about your aggressive type underperformers, we're talking about the more submissive type. They hold it over their head. They use it to, you made a lot of mistakes, but I'll be the superhero and keep you on board. But you got to do everything I say. And then the other people are seeing that dynamic play out, and it minimizes credibility. There's so much of this. It's not a black and white issue. It's not cut and dry. There's so many dynamics. And also in my world, you and I have talked about, Kristin, it was very difficult for me to terminate someone. Yeah. And I had an employee that had been underperforming for years. So I waited until I promoted a new branch chief. I had 2 number 2s, and I literally said, I want you to start documenting. And within 12 months, this person needs to be gone. Or if you can work a miracle and have it improve, but the miracle didn't happen. And we did terminate, but it did take a year of documentation.
Dang,
to
that
do
is
it.
long.
Yeah.
It's that whole coach up, coach out. It's like, do we see potential there? If not, you have to start documenting and coach them out. And some will self-realize, but a lot do not.
Yeah, no, it's true. Kristin, I added one more beyond the research because it happened to me and I've seen it happen before. And that is when leaders take action, but they're not supported by their superiors. Now, here's the unique dynamic. You can't go and tell your staff, oh, I tried to fire them, or I tried to deal with this. You're not permitted. That's part of, that you would be violating HR policies and that person's privacy. So it looks like you're incompetent when you actually tried to do something, but you were not supported by, headquarters. So that's an issue that does happen because I've had other people tell me that that's their story. And the employees just think you're letting it go. And that's a tough pill to swallow.
Oh, absolutely. And we want to also talk about what happens when great employees watch you tolerate bad ones. So here's where it gets really dirty, because if you're a top performer, you're watching all of this and you're thinking, why am I killing myself while Karen gets away with murder, right? And so, why don't you dive into this for us?
Yeah.
The psychology.
It literally creates disillusionment. And research shows that high performers are more sensitive to injustice in the workplace. So in other words, those people that are just skating by, they don't really care, but your high performers are watching you, and they're watching to see if you are going to deal with this, and they take it personally, and then they start to disengage.
Yes. And, you're basically showing your best players that excellence isn't rewarded and mediocrity is tolerated. So why try? Horrible message to send.
It does. And it leads to emotional burnout, not from the workload, but from the emotional tax that it plays on people of being surrounded by low standards. If you sit in within 25 feet of a high performer, your performance improves. Well, guess what? If you're around low performers, it starts to drag you down.
Right.
It's just a reality.
Right. And I'm even seeing this with my son in Taekwondo. He's been asked, I know I mentioned this a few episodes ago, but to be on the sparring team. And that's a huge thing for him. He's only been doing it a year, but now he's hanging out with the black belts and he's already gleaning some great things from them. And so I just think that's the way to do it. And we see so many Instagram memes all about surround yourself by winners, and that's the direction you're going to go in.
Kristin, there's a huge controversy going on between LeBron James and Stephen A. Smith. And LeBron, most people believe, used his influence to get Bronny James, his son, a contract with the Los Angeles Lakers, and he wasn't ready. it looks that way. So Stephen A spoke out. LeBron confronted Stephen A on the basketball court at a game. So now there's this beef going back and forth, and I listened to Stephen A. But I will tell you this, I do wonder what it did to morale of some of the players who realizes Bronny was not quite ready for the Lakers. But now that he's practicing with them, he finally had a good game recently. So I'm sure he will, eventually excel. But it looks like that LeBron ignored meritocracy and just used his influence to get his son in. So, that's a big beef.
Little nepotism there.
Yeah, and it shows the outcome of that. Now look what's happening. It's talk of the sports world. People are taking sides and all those things. So.
Interesting. Yeah, no one likes nepotism. And I can see it's great that he's improving, but other people weren't given that chance, right?
No, that's right.
So there's also a social aspect to what we're talking about here. And, when the team sees you as the leader tolerate toxic behavior or even just poor behavior, they're going to start to bond over resentment, not purpose. I've talked about how when I've had to relay a difficult message, it could have come from corporate to my team. I like to have those 5 minutes where we can complain to each other, or basically they complain and I'm able to address it and listen to it. I like to do that in front of them and with them so that they don't go off to the side and bond over frustrations that they feel I can't hear.
Yeah, and then there's this overreaching theme that happens. They go from being performance-driven to complaint-driven. And, when people get negative, I call it going to the dark side. And when they go to the dark side, it's almost impossible to get the light back. And so that's what begins to happen. So if you're listening and you need to deal with an issue, please take this seriously.
Yeah, because high performers, they're not going to stick around for all that. They will either quietly quit or literally quit.
Yeah, that's the end result. You're either going to get a toxic work environment or you're going to get a high turnover rate. There's usually no in between. So
and quiet quitting or silent. Did we call it? We did an episode. Was it silent quitting?
Quiet quitting. Yeah.
Quiet quitting, silent quitting. You guys check that out. That was in the first 2030, I would say.
Yeah, it was.
But that was a good one.
So let's break this down a little bit more psychologically. When leaders tolerate bad behavior, they're unknowingly triggering something called equity theory. Tell us about that, Kristin.
Yeah. Heard a lot about this. So basically it says that people compare what they put in versus what they get out and how that stacks up against others. So if I'm working 60 hours a week, going above and beyond, and Todd is taking 3-hour lunches and still employed, that's a breach of equity.
It is. And Kristin, although I had a great group of people, to imagine in a law enforcement academy, when I first went there, we didn't have an indoor range. So you get the firearms people working outdoors in Charleston, 100-degree weather.
Yeah.
And then you've got other people who teach in a classroom. It was almost a natural riff. Like, oh, you guys are in your cushy classroom. We're out here in the elements. So there's some of that already. And you got to be very wise as a leader of how you do that. But you certainly don't want to create inequity or inequitable work distribution. You have to be on top of that because there will be a natural rift, but it can be made a lot worse with poor management.
It also triggers cognitive dissonance. And let's say a great employee joined the team because they believed in the vision, they believed in the leader. But when actions don't match words, dissonance, that's what you get.
That's exactly right. And that dissonance causes stress, anxiety, loss of motivation. Leaders don't see it because great employees are quiet. They don't storm out. They just fade away.
So how to break the cycle? We're at that point where we are going to provide solutions here. So what do you do if you're a leader and you're listening to this? Hopefully you're thinking, yep, I've tolerated the wrong person for too long. I'm saying hopefully you have, because I think almost anyone who's in leadership has done this. There's a range on how horrible whatever you tolerated was, but everyone has allowed someone to get away with a little too much. And hopefully you're self-aware enough to say, I did that. What should I do going forward?
Yeah, the first thing is a reality check. You got to be honest, admit to yourself and your team what went wrong. Now, if it's appropriate to talk to the team, of course, but you don't have to call out someone by name, but you can say, we're resetting our standards. Sometimes you just need to come in and reestablish the guidelines or the policy or procedures.
Yes, absolutely. And then from there, take action. Don't drag it out. Don't coach someone for the 12th time. I've done this. It doesn't work out well. If you've already tolerated it, it's time to take that action that I was just talking about. They've already shown that they're not going to change. So it's time that you do.
That's exactly right. It's like you tell a child, if you do that one more time, you're going to go into timeout. If you do that one more time and they finally realize I've got about 10 more times.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So here's a powerful move. Validate your high performers. Let them know you see their effort. Tell them, I know this has been frustrating. Change is coming.
And you know what, Ron? That's exactly what I did in this scenario when I can only really think of one where I let poor behavior go too far. And I did. I told my high performer that had noticed this and brought it to my attention. And I thank her for that so much. And sometimes you have to hear it from someone else. But I said that exact thing. Change is coming. I wasn't specific, but I think we all knew who I was talking about. But you have to do that. Know. And once you've made a tough call, you want to communicate it. Let the team know why within reason, right? We have to be sensible. You can't think about, all the HR stuff that Ron and I love so much. You can't go into too much detail, but you do need to communicate that you have taken action. When a bad employee leaves, the team breathes a collective sigh of relief. I've witnessed this. They need to hear that you did it for the culture, not a punishment.
I have too. And by the way, in executive coaching, I've done this multiple times, but I had to coach a leader who was just a very nice person. And she thought she was being mean. I said, no, you're being protective. You're protecting everyone else from this toxic person.
Right.
And you have a responsibility to do that. So she just needed a mindset change.
Yeah.
Her perception needed to change of the way she was approaching it.
That is strong. So to our leaders out there, remember this. You don't rise to the level of your mission. You fall to the standard you tolerate.
Yep. Every time you ignore poor performance, you're sending a louder message than an inspirational quote in the break room.
Exactly. And your best employees, they are watching and they're deciding whether they want to keep building with you or bounce.
Yeah. And maybe take a step back and ask yourself, who are you leading for? The ones holding the line or the ones dragging it down?
That's right. That's huge right there. Seriously. Because the dirty side of leadership is not always about firing someone. It's sometimes letting them stay too long.
That's a hard truth, but it really is leadership. And this is one of the greatest lessons. Number one, I've made mistakes, and Kristin admits she did too. But when I started being proactive instead of reactive, things got so much better.
Yes.
And it is such a relief. Like you said, Kristin, people know who the low performers are. And when they see you deal with it, it not only improves the environment morale, but it elevates you as a leader. They're like, yes, that's someone that's got our back, and that's someone that's not going to tolerate this type of shenanigans. And so it's good for everyone. It's difficult at the time, but it's good for everyone.
Yeah, I think you have a great quote in your book, and it's something like, what you don't address, you promote, or you endorse.
What you permit, you promote.
There you go. I was close, right? What you permit, you promote. That is so true. And even the most seasoned leaders make mistakes. So it's just a good reminder if that's you.
All right. Wow. Another episode down, Kristin. Can you believe it?
Yep. I'm into it. I think this was a good one. This one, it's like I wish I could have shared it with myself like 7 years ago.
There's so many of these. And Kristin, you would be surprised in the executive coaching how many people use quotes from the podcast. It's really cool when I hear that. Yeah. I've got someone that I just finished coaching. They just finished the program, but they're listening to every episode. They were on like 10 or 12, but they would.
Wow.
And it's funny. We've been doing it a while now. So there was a couple of things I didn't remember. And I had that happen on my book. Someone goes, what were you? And I was like, oh gosh, what was I thinking? But that's very cool. We're so grateful for people who listen, share, give us ideas, give us questions, whatever it is, because we do this. I suffered as a leader. Kristin suffered, and we want to make things easier for you. We also want, of course, we want to entertain you. We want you to enjoy listening because we know the competition for podcasts is stiff and fierce. So we do want you to come back week after week. We want to provide information that you'll not only enjoy, but maybe can grow a little bit. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And I have to share, I was pulling up this picture because it's so funny. One of our listeners sent me a text message, and it was a picture of his playlist that he listens to while he's in the office. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Can I share it? Because ours was in there. And he's like, some of your followers might say something about one of the podcasts I listen to. And I look at it here, and it's called In Your Pants Podcast. And it shows like basically like a skeleton from the waist down. And he's like, I promise it's nothing weird. Oh, hilarious. But anyways.
That is funny. Yeah. And I thought it was really cool when I got in someone's vehicle and we were on the screen there. That was really cool.
That is awesome. So keep it coming, folks.
Yep. All right, everybody. Be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.